So, following on with the last 100 Days challenge, I decided to go ahead and do a 100 Days challenge of one of my favorite early access games at the moment, which is OVA Magica. I have played this a few times before, so this is just a recap for me, but I booted the game up and then they updated the intro so it had some explanations on the UI before you get a message from your mom talking about the town that you're moving to and reminding you that you have absolutely no money. And then not long after, you arrive into Clovertown. But before you can do anything, it's time to customize the character. I might have played this game before, but I definitely spent way too much time on the character customization. I ended up deciding to go with pink hair for the character, and then I went along with the some really cute jeans and the blue flannel as well. I ended up deciding to name my character Zeely, which I thought was a super cute name. And then finally, the loading screen takes you to meet some of the townsfolk. And this is your first introduction to seeing any of the blobs, which are the creatures that you will collect in this game. So you meet the mayor, and then Ruby and Jade. Jade's super sweet and like mellow, and Ruby is kind of chaotic and loud. And Jade has a little cow blob named Clara, and then Ruby has a cute little blob named Daisy, just like a little bunny rabbit, super cute. And Armel is just being nice and quiet as per the usual. And then they're just explaining what are blobs, and then Ruby and Jade take you over to the local blob center so you can get your blob. And when you show up, there's like this huge line of people, and you find out that is because the champion Lapis is there, and he is kind of a jerk. He ends up pushing you off to the side, quite literally. I like Lapis as a character, but this is definitely not one of the great parts of his character in the beginning. And then you meet Flint, who works over at the Breeders, and he brought over 3 different eggs for you to choose from, and I chose a magma type blob. And then you hop on top of the egg to hatch it, which is pretty funny to watch. And then I decided to name my blob Akari. And then you head on over outside, and there is Ruby and Jade. And our blob's just hiding behind us because they're a little nervous at this time. And then Ruby immediately challenges you to your very first battle, and it was just a quick thing on how to battle and use items in terms of a tutorial, but it wasn't super hard, the mechanics of it, so fortunately I got that taken out pretty quickly. Because it was a magma type, it was super effective to Ruby's little guy. So the fight ended pretty quickly, and then Ruby and Jade took me back over to the farm. And when you get over to the farm, you realize that this farm is completely in disrepair. It is completely dilapidated, and in fact, there is no house. Fortunately, though, Jade is prepared, as I have come to discover in my time playing this game, and she has a tent for you, which is really helpful, but also, like, I'm shocked that our mother did not actually give us one. Or, like, let us know, hey, there's not going to be anywhere for you to sleep. And then they just tell us to go visit Cherai when I have a chance so that she can build an actual house so that it's at least a little bit warmer. And then they leave us to go ahead and get our rest for the next big day coming ahead with us trying to get that house built. So day 2 started out with us getting woken up by Jade and Clara, and they were just giving us a quick overview on how to take care of our blobs, as well as getting some farming done, and then we got some tools and some seeds, and then got our first quest to get our house built. So I just went ahead and started clearing the farm plots that I had, and so I could start planting some seeds. And then I went ahead and got them all planted, and then I went ahead and started watering all of my crops. And then I went ahead and cleared some of the mounds of dirt that were all over the farm so that I could add more farm plots. And then I used that to make those farm plots, and then I ran out of dirt, so I went ahead and continued trying to obtain some more so that I could have some more areas to plant crops. And then I headed over to the storage bin to put away some of the items I didn't need at that point. And then I went ahead and continued digging up some more dirt. And once I ran a little too low in energy, I just went ahead and started making my rounds talking to some of the townsfolk. Since your skills are directly tied to your friendship levels in this game, it really does push you to actually want to interact with the NPCs. Then I met Flint, and then I met Citrine and Maja as well. And then I headed over to the Blob League to get the little academy training courses done. And Jade taught me how to use Blob's various abilities, such as how to use the bomb blob when you need to use explosives, and then the rock blob for clearing out space on your farm. And then apparently the turtles are used for a sprinkler ability. And then I did a blob cravings course with Flint, and it was pretty much covering how to take care of your spirits and feed them items that they like when they had cravings, and how to determine when those cravings were about to end. And after that, he let us borrow a tennis ball so that we could play a game with the little bunny blob that was in the simulation with us. And then after that simulation, I went over and said hi to Ruby, who was a bit upset that she had to work on the farm. Then I went over towards the ruins, and I got to meet a member of the Exploration Guild, Coral. And Coral was explaining what they do, and she let me know that in order for me to join the Adventurers Club, I would need to spend 1,000 gold. And obviously I didn't have that, so I just continued making my rounds with some of the other townsfolk. And then I made my way over into the mayor's office because I had a quest to go and visit him. And pretty much he told me to go and talk to some of the townsfolk, which I was already doing. And then I headed up to the pier to talk to Garnet, and she gave me my very first fishing rod. And then I made my first attempt to get some fishing done before running into Jasper, who was not really paying attention and almost ran me over with his hoverboard. And then I went over to the big mansion to meet Lazuli for the first time. She's such a sweetheart, and I was really excited to finally meet her in this save. And she was a little nervous because she hadn't met anybody new in a while, so she was hiding a little bit before she decided to introduce herself. And then I had a run-in with my least favorite character in this game, Emerald. He's not a bad character, he's just not really my cup of tea. But he's sweet, and he had caught a bug, he released it, and then he gave me a bug net as a gift. And then I went and said hi to Lapis, even though he's never happy to see me. And then I decided to head back to the farm and end the game day. So on day 3, we got a visit from Saphir, and he gave us some cooking supplies as well as some recipes so that we could be able to make some food instead of having to just eat raw crops. And then I got a thank you gift in the mail, which was a snowman blob egg. But I left that alone and then went foraging and fed craved item to my blob. And then I went over to the general store and met Carnelian, who was very upset because I had left mud all over his store. And then I went and said hi to Jasper, since I ran into him when I was in town. And then I went over to go and say hi to Lazuli because I love saying hi to her. And she was very sad because her brother hadn't visited in a while. And then I continued my rounds of talking to the other townsfolk. And then I did some fishing and encountered this little crab blob. So I fought him and I won, which went pretty well. And I was pretty happy with that. And then I continued fishing and then fought another one, and that did not go according to plan. And then the day ended. So day 4 started out and Carnelian came over to the farm to give us a shipping bin so we can finally sell some of our produce, and to complain about me making his shop all dirty. So I decided to sass him a little bit, or a lot of it, depending on how you look at it. And then I sold some of the products I had, and then I got an alert about the festival for the week, since the one thing about this game is it has shorter weeks, and on like the 4th or 5th day of the week, you have a festival that appears. Then I went ahead and was collecting some forageables, and I found some lavender, which was a craved item for my blob, so I gave it to Akari. And then I continued on with my grind of digging up some dirt so I can increase my amount of farm patches. And I just did this for a while to try and kill some time as well. And then I realized my inventory was completely full, so I went and put some items in my inventory into my storage, and then I crafted some more plant beds. And here you can see me make a not so great choice with the placement. I really didn't like it at this point. But then I headed over to the festival since it was time for it to begin, and then said hi to all the townsfolk. And Lapis was complaining as per the usual, which isn't a surprise. And then the mayor decided to bore us to tears with a history lesson, and then we start hunting for the eggs, which is actually a really fun mechanic. I really do enjoy this. And then not long after, I had finished everything, so I went over to buy a recipe from Saphir, and I also used my earnings from the egg race to buy a blob egg, because then I could sell it for a lot of money so I can get that Adventurers Club membership purchased. And it was pretty late at that point, so I just went ahead and ended the day. So day 5 started out, and the mayor came and visited the farm, and he was just asking how I'm getting along with everyone before handing over a residence certificate for me, even though I still don't have a house at this point. And then he told us about the Clover Cup tournament, and so we had a quest to sign up for that. And then I collected the coins from my shipment box, and then I went to my mailbox and got a letter from Jet, who is essentially the journalist in town, wanting me to come over so that he can interview me for a story. And then I went ahead and watered what little crops I have before heading over to go and say hi to Jade. And then I went over to the Adventurers Club so that I could turn in that fee to Coral. Then she brought me inside and introduced me to a couple of the members of the club, and I met Harold, who's the bartender, and he tried to give us a cocktail. And then I got an Adventurers Club uniform, and of course, good old Ruby shows up right at that point, and Coral tells me to come back the next day so that we can go on our first adventure into a blob world. And then after that I decided I wanted to go and visit Lazuli to say hi to her, whom is looking for Belle because she ran off again. And then I went to Orion's Wheel in Town Square, and I spun for some fruit and got a watermelon. Then I went ahead and decided to actually work on getting that house built so I'm no longer sleeping in a tent. And so I was just chopping down wood for a very long time. And then I saw that watermelon was actually one of the craved items, so I went ahead and fed my blob Akari that. And then I put my items into my storage chest, and then I ended the day. So day 6 started out, and Flint came over to the farm, and he just wanted to check on how our blobs are doing. And then he went ahead and gave some recipes or blueprints for a feeder and then a blob barn. And then I went ahead and harvested my sunflowers that finished growing and then sold them before watering the rest of my crops. And then I continued on with cutting down some more trees for the wood I need for building my house, so that at one point we can stop living in a tent. And I just did this for a while until I ran really low on energy. And then I put my items in storage, and then I headed over to the ruins for my first Blob World expedition. And of course Ruby had to come on and join us because she could never say no to some combat. And then Coral gave us a brief history lesson on Blob Worlds and showed us where the altar is, where you place the runes for that specific world in order to access. And then we placed the rune on the altar, and then the forest portal opened up. And then she warns us these are dangerous areas, and she gives us a return wand so that we can use that whenever it's ready for us to leave the blob world if we get in over our heads. And then I remembered from my other saves that these trees are a crafting material, so I went ahead and cut some of those down and then trained up my blobs while we were over there for a while. And then I found some copper ore spots, so I obviously grabbed those before I continued training up my blobs a little bit, and then continued harvesting some more resources while I was over there till I ran dangerously low on the energy. And then I used my return wand to head back, and then I headed back into town and said hi to some of the townsfolk, starting with Jade. And then obviously I had to go and say hi to Lazuli because I love her so much. And then I went over to say hi to Jet so that we could do our interview. And he's definitely an interesting character, that's for sure. And not long into the interview, the mayor comes in and he decides he wants to do a consensus. So he asks Jet to do a consensus, but he decides he doesn't want to do that. So he pawns it off to me. And then I get a camera to take pictures of the townsfolk and their blobs for their record. And then this is where I discovered the new friendship mechanic. So essentially you can spend money to increase your level of friendship so that you don't have to talk to them, which is going to be very helpful so that I don't have to talk to Emerald constantly. And then I checked my mailbox and I had gotten an egg from Flint, which was a brood egg, which these are just descendants of a couple of different types of blobs. But I got a decent powered one, and then I ended up deciding to name them Ginger instead of Scout. And then it was sort of late at that point, so I just went ahead and ended the day. So day 7 started out, and I just went and watered the few remaining crops that I had left, and then continued on with some farming for some wood resources before I headed over to socialize with some of the townsfolk, and then I stopped by Ryan's health wheel, and I was not lucky. I got absolutely nothing from there, and then I unlocked some of the fast travel points while I was out and headed over to the mines to try and grind some resources, and got into a fight and lost pretty quickly, and then the day ended. So day 8 started out, and I had absolutely no energy after passing out the day before, but luckily it was a rainy day and my crops finished growing, so I went and harvested them before heading over to the nearby restaurant to eat some food to replenish some energy. And then I went and said hi to Saphir and Jasper since they were nearby before heading back to the farm to continue getting some resources for crafting and building until I ran out of energy again, so I dropped off those resources into my storage chest and then went over to say hi to Jade and Flint, and then continued my rounds with some of the other townsfolk as well. And then I was out of energy and talked to everybody, so I went ahead and ended the day. So day 9 started out, and I just started out by taking out some of the rocks on the property so I could build up my stone so that maybe we could start working on getting a house built. And then once I was low on energy, I went and made my rounds talking to some of the townsfolk. And then I did another attempt at Ryan's wheel, and this time I got a banana. And then I headed back to the farm, and then I ended the day because I talked to everybody and I had no more energy at that point. So day 10 started out, and yet again I continued farming for some more stone resources, and then I also needed some fiber, so I was dealing with that as well by chopping down a bunch of bushes. And then I ate that banana I got from the spin wheel to farm for some more, and then I finally had enough to get rid of my tent so that I could have an actual house. And then I went around talking to some of the townsfolk, and then I went and visited Lazuli because she's my favorite, and then continued talking to some of the other folks around town. And then I remembered I could pick up some items in the ranch area, so I went and grabbed those to sell them for some income because I was pretty broke after building the house. And then I grabbed some apples from the area because it was one of my blob's craved items. And then I found some sunflowers in that ranch field as well, so I sold some of those. And then put the apples into my storage chest before I went ahead and ended the day. So day 11 started out, and we got pranked by Cheroy, telling us that the farm was on fire when in fact everything was fine, because apparently we did not wake up even when she was building the house. And then she gave us some items and then a blueprint for the furnace. And then I went and collected the income I got from the shipping bin. And then I went ahead and placed some more farm plots, and then dug up some more soil so I could make some more. And then I went over and purchased some seeds from Jade, and then I went and made my rounds talking to some of the other townsfolk. And then I went to go and visit Lazuli, and I triggered a heart event, which was really cute. We got to give her some books and read with her before her brother chased us out of the house. And then I continued on talking to some of the other townsfolk, and then I ran out of people to talk to, so I just deposited my extra items in my inventory, and then I went ahead and ended the game day. So day 12 started out, and the Rose Festival was today, so I just started tilling my fields and planting some crops, and then watering them while I was waiting for the time to pass. And then I added some more plots and then dug up some more soil. Then I went and talked to the non-friendship NPCs till it was time for the event to start. And this event is always kind of weird, so essentially they have a musician that doesn't show up, so you have to do this mini game where you're playing an instrument for them. You choose between a saxophone and a violin, and I did not do well at all. But they do throw roses at you, so you can actually gather them and then sell them later on, which gives a decent amount of cash. And then it was late by the time the festival ended, so I just headed back to the house and ended the day. So day 13 started out, and I had made a grave error. Essentially, I removed my scarecrows when I was planting all of these crops, so I got surrounded by crow blobs that kept beating me up. So I had to move my plots, and then I ran away to the blob world so that I could train up my little blobs, because ideally at some point I need to be able to get a crow egg, and we are not in a position to be able to do that at this time. And this ended up being a day where the shooting stars were happening, so I picked up some of the ore while we were over there. And then it got pretty late, so I just went ahead and ended the day. So at the start of day 16, it was raining, and I just moved the remainder of my crops back, and then fixed my scarecrow situation, and then placed my fences again, and then I went over to the nursery so I could pick up some toys for my blobs, and then I had my first heart event with Jade, and then went and talked to a few of the townsfolk, and accidentally triggered a heart event with Ruby as well, which was a pretty easy fight, and it was over like almost immediately. And then I continued talking to some of the other townsfolk, including Lazuli, which is always fun to do. And then I headed back to the farm, and it was pretty late at that point, so I just went ahead and ended the day. So day 17 started out, and I just grabbed the coins from my shipping bin, and then went ahead and watered my crops before running over to the ruins. And I decided to go ahead and bring Ruby with me, since she's one of the few NPCs I could invite along. And then I went ahead and started collecting some resources from the spore trees, and then continuing working on leveling up my blobs. I didn't spend too long in there, and then I went ahead and headed back out and headed back to the farm, and then I put some of the resources into my storage bin before heading out to go and say hi to some of the townsfolk. And then I stopped by the Blob League so that I could sign up for the Clover League, even though I am very far away from being able to actually participate in that. And then I went and said hi to Lazuli, and then I actually started playing with a toy for the first time with my blobs, which was super fun. And then it was kind of late at that point, so I went ahead and ended the day. So day 18 started out, and I just picked up the income from my sell crate, and then went ahead and watered what little crops I had left before heading over to the ruins to train again. And I went ahead and brought Ruby along yet again, and then continued trying to collect some spore resources from those trees, because I know I'll need them later on. And then went ahead and started training up my blobs. And I was there for a while, and then they got kind of low on health, so I decided to head on out. And then I sold some of my resources before putting the rest of them into storage, and it was pretty late at the day at that point, so I just went ahead and ended the day there. So day 19 started out, and I just collected my coins from my shipment box, and then went ahead and watered my crops before playing a quick game with my blob. And then I headed over to the general store, talked to Cornelian, and then went over to the health wheel and got a piece of pineapple before I headed over to the ruins to get some training done. And then I came across another puzzle room, so I did that real quick, and then continued on with training up my spirits for a while. And then I decided to head back out of the blob world and went and collected some apples from the ranch and some sunflowers so that I could sell the sunflowers in my shipment box. And then I put my extra materials into my storage chest, and then I went ahead and ended the day. So day 20 started out and just collected some of my cash from the shipment box before I harvested my strawberries that finished up. Then I put half of them into the storage in case they're needed for a blob with a craving. And then since it was a festival day, I decided to take advantage of that and take some photos with the camera for the census quest I have, which ended up being a really smart choice because that killed all of the time I had before it started. And then I went into the festival and did some of the various games to earn some tickets, and then gathered some of the tickets that were just fallen to the ground. And then I did the hammer minigame, which I was really bad at, and then went ahead and spun Emerald's wheel to try and get some tickets there as well. The eating contest is always one of my favorite minigames though, so I was happy to indulge in that. Then after I did all the mini games, I went ahead and headed back to the farm and put my extra tickets and clovers into my storage before I went inside and into the game day. So day 21 started out and I grabbed some income from my shipment box and then collected my one measly strawberry plant before leaving the farm to go and say hi to Emerald, and then went over to Jade's farm store to pick up some seeds and to say hi to her. And then it was the start of a new season, so that meant new crops were appearing in the ranch's fields, so I grabbed some wheat and then grabbed some apples while I was over there before heading back to the farm to till my fields and plant some seeds. I was pretty low on stamina this day and time, so I decided not to go into the ruins, but I did stop by Ryan's health wheel, and then I continued taking some photos for the census. And then I accidentally triggered a heart event with Lapis, and then I put my items that I got into my storage and then into the game day. So day 22 started out, and I just grabbed my cash from the shipment box before farming for some materials on the farm for a little bit. And then I went over to the mining area and found a couple of blobs and NPCs I hadn't taken pictures of for the census, so I did that before fighting a couple of creatures in the mines and trying to gather some copper. And then after I gathered those resources, I went over to the health wheel and won a cob of, or a thing of corn, and then took some more photos before I went and said hi to Lazuli, and then went and said hi to Flint and Carnelian as well. And then went back to trying to gather some more farming resources until I ran low on energy, and then I just went ahead and ended the day. So day 23 started out, and I just went ahead and started trying to gather some wood, and then I noticed that I had not gotten the photos of Jade and Ruby's parents in their blob, so I went and did that, and then accidentally triggered a heart event with Ruby, which I promptly ignored, and then proceeded to go over to Ryan's health wheel. And then I went and said hi to Lazuli, and then I decided to end the game day because I ran out of energy trying to chop down trees. So day 24 started out, and it was the Harvest Festival season, or not really a Harvest Festival, more of like a Halloween festival. So I headed over pretty early to try and do that and listen to Emerald rant about the safety issues, and then went ahead and did the festival. So the premise of this festival is you have to fight monsters to get near the floating pumpkins, and then you cut them down for candy to trade in for prizes. So I just did that and then injured myself pretty quickly, so I went back to the cauldrons to heal up. And then I bought a blueprint from Carnelian, and then I got through all the candy, so I just decided to leave the festival and head back to the house to end the game day. So day 25, I got a letter stating that it was a shooting star day, so that'll be happening later into the evening where a bunch of random pieces of ore and star shards would be populating. I just went ahead and watered my crops and then headed over to the nursery area and triggered a heart event with Flint. And now our level was officially at 1. And then I went ahead and said hi to Citrine and Lapis, and then accidentally encountered a heart event with Emerald, where he is making me build a museum. And then I went and said hi to Jade and Garnet, and then headed on over to Ryan's health wheel, where I yet again got a thing of corn. And then continued making my rounds, talking to some of the townsfolk, and then triggered another heart event, this time with J-Roy, and also another one with Carnelian. And then finished that heart event with Ruby, where she thinks that there's a ghost, but in reality, it is just good old Garnet and her blob. Then while I was over in near the railroad tracks, I gathered some of the ore falling from the sky and the star shards, and then I headed back to the house and ended my game day. So day 26 started out, and I grabbed some income from my shipping bin and then harvested some of the corn that I had growing and then put some of it into storage before I played some racquetball with my Blabakari. Then headed over to the ruins and said hi to Lapis, who was very angry to see me. And then I did some resource farming in the ruins while also training up my blobs for a while. And then I came across a puzzle room, so I went and did that before I continued on with some more training until it got a little later in the day, so I left the blob world and then headed on over to the health wheel, and this time I got a grape instead of corn, which was a nice surprise. Then I went and said hi to Lazuli, and then I shipped a couple of eggs and tree seeds that I found while I was in the ruins, and then I put some of my extra materials into my storage chest, and then I ended the game day. Day 27 started out, and I just grabbed some income from the shipping bin and then shipped some more of my corn that I had harvested the day prior. And then I headed over to the ruins to get some training done and almost immediately found a puzzle room, so I went and did that before continuing on with trying to level everybody up. And after I was there for a while, I left the blob world and then made my rounds talking to some of the townsfolk. And, of course, can't resist an opportunity to do the blob wheel, and I got a kiwi blob egg from it. And then I went over to the restaurant to get some food, because it'll give you a recipe, and unfortunately Saphir was getting chewed out by his boss, which was super sad. And then I went and visited J-Roy and grabbed some apples, over at the farm store, and then built my very first blob barn. And Jade was inside and gave me a cow blob egg. And after I hatched it, obviously I had a cow blob, and then she taught us how to shovel up the poop, and then I went ahead and moved the kiwi blob from my barn into storage. And then after I did that, I went ahead and put some of my extra materials into my storage bin, and then I ended the game day. So day 28 started out and collected my extra income I had gotten, and then went into my blob barn to feed my new cow blob and clean up after them before I headed over into the blob world to get some more training done, because I really need to get them further before I challenge the boss of this world. And then I came across a puzzle room, so I did that and found a reward with 500 gold, which was really nice. And then I continued on with the training for a while until it got a little later in the day. And then I played a game of racquetball with my Brood Blob, and then I ended the game day. So day 29 started out, and I just went ahead and took care of my Cow Blob, and then I shipped off an extra egg I had in my inventory that I got as a drop the day prior. And then I went in over to the blob world I've been in for eons at this point, and continued training up all of my blobs, and found a puzzle room, and found another one with 500 gold, which was really nice. And then I continued on with the training until it got late, and then I hatched the porcupine blob egg I got, so I got that added to my Blobopedia. And then I moved it to the storage at Flint's place, and then I put some of my extra drops I didn't need into my storage, and then I ended the game day. So day 30 started out, and I just grabbed my income from the sell crate, and then I went and took care of my cow blob before heading over to the ruins, and dealt with Lapis being rude to me before I went into the blob world with Jade to try and get our friendship up a little bit, and I trained in there for a little bit, and then I headed out and went around to say hi to Jasper because I really, really want him to give me the hoverboard. And then after I said hi to Jasper, I headed back to the farm and ended the game day. So day 31 started out, and I just put some of my extra materials into my storage before heading into my blob barn and hatching my tree blob egg that I had. Then I moved my tree blob over to Flint's storage, and then started taking care of my cow blob. And then after that, I decided to go over to the Blob League and sign up for the tournament, and did my first qualifying match against this weird card thing that it looked like it might have been supposed to be like from like a casino machine. And then I headed over to the ruins and went into the blob world to train up with Jade, and then I spotted a puzzle room, so I did that real quick before continuing on with trying to grind for a little bit. And then I spotted Jasper, so I went and said hi to him before shipping some extra materials in my shipment box, and then I ended the game day. So day 32 started out, and it was the weather festival, which is pretty much always raining whenever this happens. Well, not pretty much, it's always raining, but I needed to take care of my blob first, so I went and took care of my cow blob, and then I decided to try and get some training done before the festival started. So I was in there for a few hours before I left, so that I could participate and get my socialization up, and then I talked to some of the townsfolk real quick before talking to the mayor to get the event mini-games started. So essentially you have to follow the umbrellas that are dancing around to find the NPC that's highlighted, and then you get gifts at the end of it. And as a surprise to no one, I won a weather blob, which I went ahead and hatched so that it was in my Blobopedia, and then I talked to some more of the townsfolk, and then I headed back to the farm to put away some of my extra resources and to put my weather blob over in Flint's storage. And then I played a quick game of racquetball with Akari, and then I decided to end the game day. So day 33 ended up being a rainy day, so I just went ahead and started tilling the soil on my farm. And then when I went to leave the farm, I was stopped by Jasper, who gave me my very own steam board. Then I went over to the little ranch, and I triggered my first heart event with Jade, and she asked me to pull up some poisonous mushrooms and weeds, and then to track down an aerator for her to use on the land to make sure they wouldn't grow back. And then I unlocked a couple of skills in my skill tree, and then went and picked up some flower seeds from the flower vendor in town. And then I headed on over to the blob world to get some more training in, and came across a puzzle room, so obviously I had to do that before continuing to train for a few more hours before I headed back to the farm and sold a blob egg, as well as hatched a mushroom blob before sending him over to Flint's like the others. And then I went ahead and ended the game day after I did that. So day 34 started out, and I just picked up my income from the shipment bin, and then I went and took care of my cow blob before heading on over to grab some apples from the local apple tree, and then I headed off into the blob world with J-Roy. And this attempt in the blob world did not go to plan. I had a few good fights, and then we came across 2 tree blobs and a porcupine blob that very quickly knocked our blobs out, and then the game day ended. So day 35 started out, and I just went ahead and started watering my crops. Then I went and shipped a couple of my blob eggs that I had in my inventory, and then I went into my blob barn to take care of my cow blob, and then headed over into the blob world with Jade. And after I trained for a little bit, I headed out, and then I hatched a fox blob so I could add that to my Blobopedia. And then I headed back into the house to end the game day. So day 36 started out, and I just collected my income from the shipment bin, and then I watered my crops and took care of my cow blob. And then I headed over to the blob world by myself to just get some quick training done, and then ship some of the extra tree seeds that had popped up, and ended the game day because there wasn't much else I could do at that point. So day 37 started out, and just picked up some more of my income from my shipment box, and then harvested some of my flowers that finished growing before taking care of my cow blob, and heading over to the blob world with Flint. And we did some training for a little bit, and then it was pretty late at the time that we finished, so I just headed back into the house and ended the game day. So day 38 started out, and I just went over to go and take care of my cow blob, and then tilled the soil for my farm plots, and then picked up some pumpkin seeds from Jade before heading over to Ryan's health wheel, and I got a thing of corn yet again. And then I went and planted my pumpkin seeds, and then stopped by the restaurant to get a new recipe unlocked, and I chose a red berry cake. Then I headed over into the mines to try and take care of some of the blobs over there before attempting a league qualifying round, which I KO'd in one hit, which was good. And then I went and picked up some recipes and toys for my blobs, and then I checked out the apple tree and picked up some wheat while I was over in that area, and then I put the extra items I had into my storage, and then played a quick game with one of my blobs, and then I headed back into the house to end the game day. So day 39 started out, and it was another rainy day, so I just went ahead and saw my cow blob and took care of her before doing another qualifying match in the blob league. And then I headed over into the blob world with Jade to try and level up my blobs a little bit. And then I played a quick game of racquetball with my blob Akari, and then I ended the game day. So day 40 started out, and it ended up being another festival day, so I just went ahead and watered my crops and picked up some income I had in my shipping bin, and then I headed on over into the festival. This one's a little bit of an interesting festival. So you have to donate items into a massive hot pot in the middle of the town and give them to a giant squirrel blob. And well, I made some questionable choices, as you could see, and I made the squirrel feel sick, so he ran away. And several of the other people in town did not feel well either. But it was still not crazy late when the festival ended, so I went ahead and did some training in the mines, and then picked up some apples from the farm, and then I played some games with Akari and Ginger Snap, and then challenged another couple of villagers to a fight. And then it was pretty late at that point, so I just went back to the house and ended the game day. So day 41 started out, and I just deposited some of my extra items to the storage because it was the very first day of winter, so I had a lot of cleaning up I needed to do, and obviously to clear some of my crops in the near future as well. And then I headed on over into the blob world with Jade to train up a little bit, and almost immediately I found a puzzle room, which I obviously went ahead and did before we returned to get some more training done. And then I headed on over to the Blob League to get my qualification match done. And then I triggered a hard event with Citrine. And then I went to go and visit Chairoy real quick before heading over to the health wheel, where I got a thing of cabbage. And then I headed back to the farm to end the game day. So day 42 started out, and yet again I deposited my ridiculous amount of extra stuff into my storage, and then played a quick game of tennis with Ginger Snap before I started harvesting some rocks. And then I finally got around to placing a furnace because I do need it for a couple of quests. And then I went to go to the beach so I could get some sand because it's a material I don't have enough of. And then I triggered a heart event with Ruby, where she is making me build a pier because she's bored. And then I headed back to the farm, took care of my cow blob because I'd forgotten to for the past couple days, and started making some of that glass. And then while I was waiting for that to craft, I headed over to the Blob League to get my qualification match out of the way. And then I went and had one of my first heart events with Garnet, so now I can bring her into the blob world as well. And then I picked up the glass that was finished crafting in my furnace, and then I ended the game day. So day 43 started out, and yet again I had to deposit some extra items in my inventory. And then I went and picked up that glass I had manufactured in the furnace before taking care of my cow blob and playing a game with Akari. And then I headed back over to the beach to collect some more sand so that I could make some more glass. And then I headed over into the Blob League for my tournament, and it went really well. I even fought Ruby and won very easily, which I was really happy about. And then I went to see Pearl, who had some nice things to say about me winning. And then I went over to purchase some seeds from Jade, and then I tried to access the winter cave, and I realized very quickly that they are way more powerful than me, so I just yeeted myself from that building. And then I went back to the farm and tilled my fields, and then went around talking to some of the other townsfolk, and then went into the breedery. And because I won the tournament, they gave me a blob, a little storm blob. And then I went into town to pick up an advent calendar gift and said hi to Lazuli. And it was pretty late by the time I did all that, so I just headed back to the house to end the game day. So day 44 started out, and I just moved my storm blob over into storage, and then I took care of my cow blob, and then I checked my mail, and it let me know that the Game of Love Festival was today. So I just went ahead and started watering my crops, because I had a lot of time to kill before the festival. And then after waiting around for eons, it was finally time, so I headed over into town and talked to some of the townsfolk before getting the festival game done. So this is essentially like a dating mini game, which is really interesting. So it's based on the personality and traits of the various NPCs, and this time I got Ruby. And my prize was a Cupid blob, who I named Charlotte, and I decided to keep her on my team. And then it was pretty late by the time the festival ended, so I just went ahead and ended the game day. So day 45 started out, and I just went ahead and watered my crops, and then I went and took care of my cow blob before feeding some of the items to my blobs to try and get their energy levels up. And then I went to the clinic and had a heart event with Opal. And then I went and had another heart event with Lazuli before heading over to the beach to dig up some sand for resources because I was really low on it. And I ended up having yet another falling star event trigger. So I grabbed some of those before I ended the game day. So day 46 started out, and I just went ahead and watered my crops again. And then I played a quick game of tennis with Ginger Snap and some racquetball with Akari before heading over to take care of my cow blob. And then I headed over to go and say hi to Chayroy, and then grabbed an item from the advent calendar before heading over to the health wheel, and then crafting some copper ingo. And then I went and grabbed some rock resources, and then started the furnace to make some more ingo as well, and then I headed back into the house to end the game day. So day 47 started out, and yet again I was tending to my crops, and then picked up the ingo I had made the day before, and then crafted some more before continuing on with the farming for stone resources before I went over to feed my cow blob. And then I went and had a heart event with Lapis, who was not very happy to see me, and then I did some training in the blob world with Flint, and then it was pretty late when we left the blob world, so I just got home and ended the game day. So day 48 started out, and I just went ahead and watered my crops as per the usual before continuing on yet again with collecting some rocks. And then I sold some items in my shipment box and collected some more ingo from my furnace before putting some items back into storage so my inventory wasn't bursting at the seams. And then went to the blob world with Chayroy to try and get some training done, and almost immediately found a puzzle room, so I did that before continuing on with training in there. We stayed there for a little bit until it got late, and then I headed back to the house, and then I ended the game day. So day 49 started out, and I just went and harvested all of my eggplants that finished growing, and then I went and took care of my cow blob because I hadn't for a few days, and then went over to tilling my fields before playing a quick game with Ginger Snap, and then I went back to my grind of collecting some rocks and pretty much spent the entire day collecting all of the rocks. And then I went over to Chayroy and triggered a heart event, but first and foremost my goal was getting that museum completed, and then I gave her the wood she needed for that heart event, and then talked to a few of the other townsfolk around town, and then went and triggered a heart event with Flint where he was trying to find some missing items. And then after that heart event, I headed back to the house, sold some of my eggplant, and then ended the game day. So day 50 started out, and I just collected some income from my shipment box, and then went over to take care of my cow blob before playing a quick game with Ginger Snap as per the usual, and then triggered a heart event with Jade where Ruby decided to do something chaotic and give a questionable drink to their blobs, which made Daisy and Clara super large and running amok in town, and was terrorizing the townsfolk. So we had to battle them, even though we were completely underpowered, and we very, very much lost, and Ruby always has me just shaking my head. And then I decided to go ahead and continue talking to some of the other townsfolk to try and get their levels up. And then I headed back to the farm and planted some cabbage. and then went ahead with watering it, and then headed on over to the health wheel. Then I got a focaccia from the restaurant so I could unlock that recipe, and then I went over to the museum to finish that quest I had and met Ash, who is like my favorite non-dateable NPC, so I was really happy to see her. And then they were making me fill up the museum even though it was his idea, and then I went around and collected some more stone, and I was collecting stone a little too late and I ended up passing out. So day 51 started out, and I went directly into town to buy a crate because I was very low on energy from the day prior, and then I headed over to the health wheel to get some more food before heading back to the farm so I could actually water all of the cabbage that I just planted. And then I went and took care of my cow blob before putting some extra resources into my storage so I could continue farming for stone. And then I went back to the restaurant and got some creme brulee. And then I headed over into the mines and fought a couple of blobs while I was in there. And then headed over into the ruins after a few days away. And I brought Garnet there with me this time, and was also farming for stone in there as well while training up my blobs. And then after it got late, I headed back, but didn't leave the blob world early enough, and I ended up passing out yet again. So day 52 started out, and I ate a boatload of food so that I would have enough energy to water all of my crops. And it was in fact a festival day. This is the last festival of the year, which is pretty crazy that I've already gone through an entire game year, but they do have shorter weeks in this game, so it's to be expected. But then I went into the festival and did the Guess the Candy Cane game and got a couple of recipes from Saphir and did the gift guessing minigame, which I ended up guessing everything perfectly, so I got a blob deer egg. After I finished talking to everyone, I headed back to the farm and realized I forgot to water one of my crops, so I went and watered that, and then I put some extra items into my storage and ended the game day. So day 53 started out, and yet again I was watering my cabbage. And then I went and played a quick game with Ginger Snap and Akari. And then I grabbed some sand so I could turn it into glass. And then I went and said hi to my cow blob. And then continued farming for some stone resources. And then was collecting various forageables while waiting for the glass to finish. And decided to unlock some of the skills in my skill tree. And then I finally had enough glass for the boutique I was trying to make, and then I decided since I was in town I was gonna go and talk to some of the townsfolk, and it was pretty late by the time I finished talking to everyone, so I just headed back to the house to end the game day. So day 54, I finally had my cabbage finish harvesting, so I grabbed those, and then I went and took care of my cow blob before I went and made some copper ingot in my furnace, and then triggered a really cute heart event with Garnet, where yet again Emerald was being a jerk and trying to break up a party, the epitome of a party pooper. And then I went and said hi to Flint, and then finished talking to Carnelian to finish triggering the boutique quest line. And then I went and said hi to Lazuli and Jasper before heading over into the ruins and into the blob world with my least favorite character, Emerald. And after I finished training my blobs up with Emerald, I headed back to the house and ended the game day. So day 55 started out, and I just took care of my cow blob before heading into town to get some socialization done, and then I headed back into the blob world with Emerald because unfortunately I do need his friendship level up in order to get more skills. So we stayed in the blob world for a bit until it got late, and then I sold some extra resources in my shipment box, and then I ended the game day. So day 56 started out, and I just put some extra resources into my storage before crafting a couple of wishing stars so I could get some extra income. And then I went and took care of my cow blob, and then I grabbed one of the wishing stars and sold it in my shipment box before heading over to the beach to get some more sand. And then I noticed that Garnet was over there, so I went and said hi to her before saying hi to Emerald, because unfortunately I need his friendship to go up. And I couldn't resist saying hi to Ash. And then I headed back into town, grabbed a gift from the advent calendar, and then headed over to the health wheel before saying hi to a couple more of the townsfolk before heading off into the ruins and into the blob world to get some more stone and work on training up my blobs. And I noticed there was a puzzle room, so I obviously had to do that. And then I went back to training for a little bit until it got super late, so I rushed home, put my extra materials into my storage, and ended the game day. So day 57 started out, and I just collected some extra income from my shipment box before saying hi to my cow blob, and then I fed some craved items to my blobs before heading back to the beach to collect more sand. And then I went and said hi to my least favorite character again and triggered a heart event. And then I headed back to the barn and placed a litter box before heading back into the blob world with Citrine this time, because she is a much better companion to have. And then I stayed there to train up my blobs for a while until it got late, and then I headed back to the farm to end the game day. So day 58 started out, and I just collected my income from my shipment box and then took care of my cow blob, which is a lot easier with a litter box. And then I went and said hi to Jasper and Opal before heading into town and getting my gift from the advent calendar, and then triggering a heart event with Saphir. And then I went over to the health wheel, and then I went into the blob world again with Citrine, and we trained up our blobs for a while until it got really late again, and then I shipped an extra egg I had gotten in that world and then headed back into the house to end the game day. So day 59 started out, and I just collected some items from my shipment box before taking care of my cow blob, and then I left the farm and triggered a heart event with Citrine. Citrine was being scouted by a dancing troupe, which her dad was very upset about, and then the dancing troupe asked me to go ahead and build them a theater so they can perform. And then I finally decided to get started with the qualification points for the new tournament and did a qualification match before heading into the blob world with Jasper, and came across a puzzle room pretty quickly. And then I continued training up my blobs for a while until it got super late, and then I shipped another blob egg, and then I ended the game day. So day 60 started out, and I just collected some additional income from my shipment box and then put some extra materials into my storage. Then I headed out and collected a gift from the advent calendar before heading off into the blob world to get some training done before the festival. And then I went and talked to a couple of the townsfolk and bought a dress from Carnelian, and then watched the fireworks show, and it asks you a bunch of questions, and based on the questions you get a specific brood blob egg, so I did that. And then I did the dance battle with Citrine and got a party blob, which was cool. And then I also hatched the brood blob I also got. And then after I hatched those eggs, I headed back into the house and ended the game day. So day 61 marks the first day of year 2, and I just removed the heater from my cow blob barn and then put a AC unit in there, and then went to the Blob League and triggered a heart event with Jasper, who was getting made fun of by some mean girls. And then I went and decided to do a league qualification round and won by the skin of my teeth. I literally survived with like 1 HP because of a storm blob, and I took that as a wake-up call to spend some time training in the blob world. So I did some training there until the end of the day, and then I hurried back to the house. So day 62 started out, and I just went over and took care of my cow blob real quick before heading over to the Blob League for another qualification match. Luckily this time went much better, and then since I was over there, I went and said hi to Opal and then I headed over to the train tracks to say hi to Carnelian, and then I went and said hi to Ash and Emerald, and then when I headed over to the ruins, I saw Lapis, so I went and said hi to him before heading into the Blob World with Garnet, and I didn't leave the Blob World early enough, and I passed out in my entryway. So day 63 started out, and I headed back into my cow blob barn to take care of her, and then I crafted some ingo in my furnace before tilling my fields. And then I headed on over to buy some rice seeds from Jade. And then while I was over there, I went and grabbed some sunflowers so that I could sell them for resources before heading over into the Blob World with Garnet. And while I was in there, I grabbed some ore and then went back to training, and I stayed there until it was late again, and this time I made it to my bed instead of passing out. So day 64 ended up being another festival day for the egg hunt, so I just went ahead and took care of my cow blob and then started planting some seeds, and then I headed over into the festival and said hi to the townsfolk before getting started with the egg hunt, which I actually did pretty well on, surprisingly enough. And I ended up having enough to buy some blueprints and a blob egg, because the year prior I had used that egg for accumulating some more money because I was very broke. And then I went ahead and hatched that egg, and then I put them in storage over at Flint's, and then I headed back into the house and ended the game day. So day 65 started out, and it was another falling star day, so I just went ahead and got started watering my sheer amount of rice that I have growing. And then I went and said hi to my cow blob before upgrading my pickaxe with Chayroy. And then I headed over into the Blob League for yet another qualification match where I said hi to Lapis before heading back into the Blob World with Garnet and upgrading my Steam board in the skill tree. And while I was in there, I collected some more ore and then continued training until it got crazy late and went to bed by the skin of my teeth before I passed out. So day 66 started out, and I just went ahead and got my rice crops all watered, and then I went in my barn to take care of my cow blob before doing another qualification match against one of the girls that was making fun of Jasper. And then I went over to Garnet to trigger a heart event where she is having me build a spa. And then I went and said hi to Lapis, who was right outside the ruins, and then I entered the Blob World by myself to get some training done until it got kind of late. Then I played a quick game of tennis with Charlotte, and then I headed back to the house and ended the game day. So day 67 started out with me taking care of my cow blob, and then I went and started making some ingo in my furnace before leaving the farm and giving some of my blobs their craved items before heading over to get some training done in the forest blob world, and did some farming for some resources while I was in there. And I stayed there till it got pretty late, and then I headed back to the farm, then deposited my items into the storage, and then fed another craved item to one of my blobs before ending the game day. So day 68 started out, and I just grabbed some items from my storage that I could feed to my fox brood blob, and then I crafted some more copper ingo in my furnace before heading on over to the beach to get some more sand. And then I went and spun the health wheel while I was at it, and then picked up an ice cream because one of my blobs was craving it. And then I headed back to the farm before heading into the blob world to get some training done, and stayed there until I got the alert that it was getting late. And then I put that an extra blob egg into the shipment box, said hi to my cow blob, and then ended the game day. So day 69 started out, and I noticed a couple of my rice fields were done, so I harvested them before watering the rest of my crops. And then I headed over to the Blob League to compete in the tournament, and it wasn't actually that difficult, thankfully, which meant that the world levels got higher, which meant that I will have appropriate support for the boss fight. So I made my way into the blob world with Jasper, and we took on the giant butterfly blob and managed to knock them out within a couple hits. And I got a mixer recipe as a reward, as well as a drake butterfly blob egg. And then I headed back to the farm and ended the game day. So day 70 started out and I got a letter from Coral asking me to stop by the Adventurers Club. But before I did that, I harvested my rice and then sold some of it and put the rest into storage before stopping by the club, where they were throwing a little party since I defeated my first boss fight. And then I unlocked the pirate blob world, so I went and headed over there and trained for a little bit with Jade before I headed back to the farm and started making some glass in my furnace. And then I headed back into town and spun the blob wheel and triggered a cutscene with Ruby real quick, and then I headed back to the farm, made some more glass, and fed my blobs, and then I ended the game day. So day 71 started out, and I made some more Go in my furnace before heading over to Cheyroy to get the theater built. And then I went and bought some ice cream for Charlotte, and then had Charlotte do her love spell ability to a few of the NPCs around town. And then I headed back into the pirate blob world with Jade, and I also farmed for some ore while I was in there before heading back to the grind until it got really late, and then I ran back to the house and ended the game day. So day 72 was a festival day for the little rose festival in the evening, so I just went and took care of my cow blob and then placed the mixer, which was the blueprint I unlocked when I defeated the butterfly blob boss. And then I headed back into the blob world with Jade to get some more training done, and then obviously I had to collect some ore while I was over there, and it was pretty productive, and I managed to get a decent amount done before I headed into town for the festival for the minigame that I am absolutely the worst at. But that event does give a decent amount of roses, which are a pretty penny, so I was happy about that. And then I bought a blueprint and an egg while I was in there, and I hatched the egg, and then I went back into the house and into the game day. So day 73 ended up being a rainy day, but I just went ahead and collected my income and then took care of my blobs, and then checked out the new theater that opened up with Citrine. And then I went and triggered a heart event with Opal, who's freaking out about studying, and Ruby was trying to convince me to brainwash her, which is interesting. Then I went over to the health wheel and got some fruit, and then headed over to Jade to trigger a heart event for her. And then I went back over to Cheyroy so that I could upgrade my pickaxe to the iron pickaxe. And then I headed over into the blob world to get some more training done on the pirate blob island, and then harvested some more ore while I was over there, and did that until it got pretty late. And then I headed back to the farm and hatched one of the beach blob eggs I got, and then I headed back into the house to end the game day. So day 74 started out, and I just took care of my cow blob before heading over to the ranch and collecting some of the apples in their apple tree. And then I headed into town and grabbed a ice cream because Akari was craving one. And then I headed back into the pirate blob world to get some training done and we were there for a while, and I farmed some ore resources and trained up some more, and then I ended up having a really difficult fight, and then all of my blobs passed out, and then the day ended. So day 75 started out, and it was another shooting star day, so I was definitely going to make sure to get some of those shards before the end of the day, but I just went in to take care of my cow blob, and then hatched a bomb blob egg I had before gathering some cheese from the mixer. Then I headed over into the pirate blob world with Flint, and I farmed some ore before continuing on training until it got pretty late. And then I collected the ingo I had forgotten to collect from the furnace, and then hatched a turtle blob egg before collecting some of the shards and ore falling from the shooting star event. And I did that way too late, and I ended up passing out on the farm because time management is not my thing in this game. So day 76 was yet again another rainy day, so I just went and took care of my cow blob before grabbing the ingo I had made in the furnace, and then crafting a team terminal. And then I went and sold some of my resources in my shipment box before taking my Cupid blob around town to try and get some of the villagers' levels up. And then I went into the blob world and trained for a little bit, and then went around town trying to get my friendship up for a while. And then I donated some clovers to the clover booth, and then collected some sunflowers from the little ranch, and then also grabbed some apples while I was over there, and sold the sunflowers to try and get some more income, and then I headed back inside and ended the game day. So day 77, the weather was much better, so I just went and collected my income from my shipment box, and then sold some more items to try and boost that income, and then took care of my cow blob before heading back into the blob world to train up for a bit, and collected some ore while I was over there before heading back to the house and making some gold ingo so that I could hopefully turn a profit in the near future. And then I ended the game day. So day 78, I just collected the income from the day prior before taking care of my cow blob. Then I headed on into town to pick up an ice cream, and then I headed back over to the Blob League to pick up a soda for my blobs, and then fed them their craved items before heading into the blob world with Garnet. And we got some training done for a while until it got pretty late, and then I headed back to the farm and collected some healing herbs and sold some more materials, and then I went and made some more items in my furnace, and then I ended the game day. So day 79, I just went ahead and took care of my cow blob before collecting some ingo from the furnace, and then I fed some craved items to my blobs before heading on over to the health wheel, where I got a kiwi blob egg. And then I stopped by the store and bought a compost bin recipe before saying hi to Lazuli, and then selling that extra egg I got before heading over into the blob world to farm for some stone resources and doing some training while I was over there. I did that till pretty late, and then I sold an extra egg I got, and then I ended the game day. So day 80 started out, and it was time for the Clover Festival. So I just went ahead and started forging some more ingo that I needed, and then took care of my cow blob real quick. And then I went over to the little ranch and collected some of the apples from their apple tree, and used it to feed to Ginger Snap because that was one of the craved items. And then I went into the town for the festival, and I did okay in the food eating competition, and I ended up getting a clover blob egg for donating so many clovers. And then I did some more of the mini games while I was there, and then I bought some of the toys from Carnelian's little stall, and then I crafted the for the compost bin that I needed. And then I went and hatched my new blob egg. And then I collected my Ingo and then started crafting some more before I went inside and ended the game day. So day 81 started out and I just collected my iron Ingo and then went into the blob barn to take care of both of my blobs. And then went and said hi to Emerald because I still need his level to go up before going over to the health wheel and getting a pumpkin. And then I went over to Chayroy and she built the spa. And then I went and said hi to Lazuli and picked up some popcorn and a soda for my blobs. And then I finally triggered that heart event with Jade, which caused a massive beanstalk to grow. And so obviously I decided to climb it and found this weird blob that looked like a clock called the Keeper of Time. And he essentially made everyone around me pass out. And then I decided to go and trigger a heart event with Citrine and Carnelian. And then I played a quick game of basketball with Akari, as well as with my Cupid blob, Charlotte, and also with Ginger Snap, because they all wanted to play the basketball. And then I started crafting some more Ingo before heading back into the blob world for getting some stone resources and some training done, till it was pretty late, and then I sold an egg I found and ended the game day. So day 82 starts out and I just collected my income from my shipment box before heading into the spa with Garnet and Chayroy. And then I went over to the health wheel and I got some grapes. Then I went over to see Chayroy and I got the fare on the pier ordered. And then I went over into the ruins and spotted Lapis, so I went and said hi to him before heading back into the pirate blob world to farm for some ore and get some training done for a while before I headed back to the house. And I pressed the dream function because that was new, and the Keeper of Time was there and he gave me a legendary blob egg. And then the game day ended. So day 83 started out and I just went and took care of my blobs in my blob barn and then hatched my legendary blob egg, which had a very weird passive skill, which I decided to ignore in favor of going to the pier. And unbeknownst to me, that takes up pretty much your entire day. And I just went ahead and bought a hot dog from the pier, and then I did a fortune telling at the pier, and then I headed back to the farm and tried the dreaming thing again, where apparently you can skip seasons. And then I opted not to do that, and then the day ended. So day 84 started out and it was the Halloween festival. So I just went ahead and grabbed my income from the shipment box and took care of my blobs in the barn, and then fed some of the health boosters to some of my blobs and then played some games with them. And then I headed into town for the festival and went at it with chopping down all of the pumpkins and did some training done while I was at it, because that's a real perk of this festival. Then I headed over into the cauldron before I headed back to spend some of the candy I had earned. And then I headed back to the farm and put my extra items in storage and hatched one of the eggs I got before grabbing some Ingo and heading back into the house and ending the game day. So day 85 started out and I just went ahead and started tilling my fields before heading inside to take care of my blobs in my blob barn. And then I grabbed a turtle blob I had in storage so they could water my plants after I planted them, so I wasn't wasting all of my stamina on it. And then I registered a blob team so I could just easily swap out the ones I was using for farming. And then I went ahead and watered the crops that my turtle blob didn't have enough stamina for. Then I made some cheese in the mixer before triggering a hard event with Chayroy and Flint. Then I went into the spa to heal up my stamina, and then picked up a couple of swimsuits from the spa shop. And then I went and said hi to a few of the townsfolk while I was at it. And then I stopped by the Blob League to see Ruby harassing some of the employees, and then I spotted Lapis, so I went and said hi to him before heading over into the Blob World to get some more training done. And I stayed there till it was pretty late, and then I headed back to the farm, and it was another shooting star day. So I collected some of those resources before I went inside and ended the game day. So day 86 started out, and I just went and took care of my blobs in my blob barn. Then I went into the ruins and said hi to Lapis before heading back into the blob world and farmed for some resources while also training up my blobs for a while. And after it got kind of late, I headed back to the farm and started crafting one of these stars since they produce a pretty income. And then I decided to go ahead and end the day. So day 87 started out, and I just went and took care of my cow blob before heading over into the Adventurers Club to buy some more runes so that I could head back into the blob world. And I got some training done for a while, and I wasn't paying attention, and I got knocked out by one of the fights pretty early on in the day. And so my day ended very abruptly, unfortunately. So day 88 started out, and I just went ahead and took care of my cow blob before grabbing the wishing star from the furnace. And then I went and sold some of my resources, including the wishing star, in the shipment box. Then I went and triggered a hard event with Flint before heading back into the blob world to get some training done. And then I grabbed a health booster to give to Akari, because they definitely needed it. And then I played some games with my blobs. And then I went inside and ended the game day. So day 89, I just went ahead and grabbed my income from my shipment box before having my turtle blob water my crops and then played a game so that I could hopefully get their stamina up. And then I went into the blob world with my main team and got some training done for a while, sold some of the eggs I found there before ending the game day. So day 90 started out, and I just collected some more income from my shipment box before harvesting some tomatoes and having my turtle blob water the rest of my crops. And then I went over into the ruins and said hi to Lapis before continuing to train. And while I was there, I went and farmed some ore before I ran low on stamina and headed back to the farm, put some items in storage, and then I ended the game day. So day 91 started out, and I just collected my income from the shipment box before harvesting some strawberries that finished growing, and then got signed up for the new tournament, and I started participating in my first qualification match. And this match was going okay. It wasn't like crazy hard, and I ended up finishing it pretty quickly. And then I went and said hi to Lapis while I was over in the area, and then I did some training over in the blob world, and then I headed back to the farm once I finished training and ended the game day. So day 92 started out, and it was the rainy festival, so I just went ahead and collected some income from my shipment box and then put some of my compost into the compost bin, and then fought one of the townsfolk before getting the festival started. And then I bought a few blueprints from Carnelian and then started the dance minigame. And I got all of them right, so I got a free weather blob egg, which I decided to sell because I already have that in my Blobopedia. And then I started crafting a copper ingo, and then I ended the game day. So day 93 started out, and I just collected my income from the shipment box, and then collected the ingo that I had crafted the day prior before heading over to the Blob League for the qualification match. And I triggered a hard event with Lapis, which for some reason I decided to follow him into a blob world I knew nothing about, and I got poisoned by rainbow mushrooms. So he took me to the clinic, and then I went over to the health wheel and got a blob egg for a blob I already have, yet again. And then I went into the blob world with Citrine to do some training, and then I ended the game day. So day 94 started out and I just collected my income from the shipment box and then took care of my blobs in the blob barn before getting some in go and then starting to craft some more. Then I headed over to the Blob League to do a qualification match and said hi to Lazuli, and then triggered a heart event with Jasper, who was embarrassed that he had gotten a job to earn some money. And then I stopped by Jet's office to try and increase some of the friendships around town. And then I said hi to a few more townsfolk and triggered a heart event with Emerald so I can continue leveling up his friendship, where he tried to poison us with some gross food. And then I went ahead and leveled up some of my skills before heading into the blob world with Citrine until it was pretty late, and then I headed home to end the day. So day 95 started out and I just collected my Ingo and then started crafting some gold Ingo as well before heading over to the Blob League for a qualification match. And since I was over there, I went and said hi to Lapis and then stopped by their mansion and said hi to Lazuli before triggering a heart event with Citrine, where she was telling her dad that she was gonna join the dancers at the theater. Then I headed off into the blob world with Carnelian, and we trained for a while until it got pretty late, and then I collected some of the items from the Shooting Star event before I ended the game day. So day 96 started out, and I hatched one of the turtle blob eggs that I had, and decided to name them Sheila. Then I picked up some of the gold Ingo I crafted the day prior, and sold it, and then crafted some more, and then I headed over to the Blob League for another qualification match, and then I went and said hi to Lazuli and Carnelian to get their friendship up, and then I also stopped by Saphir to have my Cupid blob do their love spell, as well as over at the clinic to Opal, and then I headed over to the blob world to train up for a bit and sold some extra blob eggs that I got while I was over there. Then I headed back into the house and ended the day. So day 97 started out and I just collected the crazy amount of income I got from my shipment box and then went into the blob barn to take care of my blobs before heading into town to do the health wheel, where I got Athena grapes, and then I went over into Carnelian's shop to say hi to them, and he gave us some of the lore behind him and his really bad relationship with Kurt. And then I went into the clinic to say hi to Opal, and then I triggered a heart event with Saphir where he got fired by Oliver, which was really sad. And then I went over into the spa to try and heal up a little bit after that fight. And then I went and picked up some popcorn from the vendor in town before stopping by the clinic once again to pick up some more health potions. And then I headed over into the Blob League to participate in the tournament, where, ironically enough, I had to fight Oliver, as well as Jasper, which was a much more difficult fight than I was anticipating. And then I headed back into the spa to heal up my blobs a little bit, before I headed back into the blob world to get some more training done. And I came across a stamina booster, so I went ahead and gave that to Charlotte. And then I headed back to the farm, put my extra items in storage, before ending my day. So day 98 started and I just went ahead and took care of my blobs before I collected some fertilizer from my compost bin, and then I went ahead and went to my furnace to collect some gold Ingo I had made the day prior, and then I headed over into town to go to the health wheel where I got a pumpkin. And then I went back into the clinic and said hi to Opal, and then triggered a heart event with Jasper and Lazuli, and we went to go visit her and we got to go take her to the beach, which was really cute and really sweet. And then I went over to the ruins and realized I was completely out of my runes, so I had to go back into the Adventurers Club to buy some more so I could return to the Pirate Blob world. And this time I went with Jade, and we stayed there till it was really late. And then I headed back to the farm and hatched one of my blobs, a little crab blob. And then I headed inside to end my game day. On day 99, I just went ahead and collected my income for my shipment box, and then started crafting some more gold ingos before taking care of the blobs in my barn. And then I headed out and said hi to Saphir, who was still groaning on his bed after being fired. And then I went into the blob world with Jade to make our attempt to fight the Pirate Blob World boss, and luckily for me, I actually did a really good job of grinding the training, and the boss fight was over pretty quickly, so I got the rune fragment and the brood blob egg, and I unlocked the recipe for a sprinkler, which made me really happy because it's a really useful thing to have in this game. And then I went over to both Jade and Flint's shop and bought some blob eggs from them. And then I went into the little brood blob area of the nursery and picked up a brood blob egg as well before triggering a heart event with Carnelian. Then I headed back to the farm and was farming for some resources around town since it was pretty early in the day. And then after a while, I deposited some of those resources into storage and sold an extra thing of gold ingo before ending my day. So somehow we already are at day 100, and this day was a festival day, so I just went ahead and collected my income and then took care of my blobs and then spent some time clearing some of my farm while I was waiting for the festival to begin. And then I went into the festival and purchased some recipes from Saphir, and then yet again gave the squirrel blob some food that he thought was rather nasty. So after that ended, I just headed back to the farm and ended the game day, which marks the end of my 100 days challenge.